Hi guys, thank you for joining me today. I'm here to talk about weaning. Now weaning is a really exciting time in any child's life and parents as well, and it's a really key stage in their life as well because it helps not only meet their nutritional needs and promote appropriate growth and development, but it also sort of drums in practices that will stay with them for life. You may have heard of the first 1,000 days of nutrition for children, and the first 1,000 days are the 9 months when they're in gestation and their first 2 years of life. Now these 1,000 days stay with them for the rest of their lives, so no pressure, but it's those 1,000 days where it's crucial to get the right nutrients in. A key part of these 1,000 days is weaning: when to do it, how to do it, what is appropriate food to offer them. So with weaning, the Department of Health recommend to start weaning at the age of 6 months. In lots of cases, this isn't possible because kids are either finishing their bottles really quickly or reaching out for other people's foods. They're able to sort of grab other people when they're eating theirs, and they're able also to hold their neck up and their head up unsupported. So whilst it's not always possible to wait till 6 months, we would say not before 4 months. And the reason we say not before 4 months is purely just from a safety point of view. We can be a bit of a choking risk because the tunnel through which the food passes hasn't quite expanded to where we need it to at that stage. In babies who are born prematurely, so when they're born either sort of 37 weeks gestation or before, for premature babies, the recommended age is between 4 to 7 months actual age. So that's not corrected age, that's actual age. So it's slightly earlier for premature babies, and that's purely to help bring on development as well, and appropriate development. So when your baby's showing signs that they're ready to be weaned, and it's a really exciting stage, they'll hold their neck up or their head up unsupported, they'll be reaching out for other foods, they'll be downing and finishing all their milk bottles. They might not be sleeping through the night, and they were previously. And this is when you know, yep, now's the time they're ready to be weaned. We recommend starting off with a thin puree, and that might be sort of 1 to 2 teaspoons at a time, maybe 2 to 3 times a day. Now a thin puree might be maybe fruit or vegetable purees. They tend to be our favoured option at the beginning, or even a thin porridge if it's pureed adequately. Once they're tolerating the thin purees, you can progress on to thicker textures. And that's just whereby you're not blending it quite so much, and they're having to sort of use the muscles in their mouth and their tongue to swallow and digest that food more appropriately. So after the thicker textures, that's when you move on to the lumpier textures, and the lumpier textures can sometimes be the most tricky stage. And that's because they think, what is this? And I'm having to work really, really hard. And they'll often spit the lumps out, or they might gag. Some kids even vomit during this stage. They cry and they're really fussy. And often parents can think there's some underlying cause for this, or something's going wrong, or they've got a problem with their swallowing. And actually, 9 times out of 10, it's just that the baby's being a little bit lazy and doesn't want to swallow those lumps. So the lump stage can sometimes be difficult, but the key is just to persist. Try not to, if possible, move back to the thicker textures, the thicker purees. Try and stick with the lumps, and they'll soon get used to it. It's just a couple of days that it might take. Once they're managing the lumps okay, that's when you can move on to finger foods. So be prepared for everything to get very messy. And we would often say, try and maybe sit them up at a high chair with the family, eating all together, making it a sociable environment. Good finger foods might be sort of vegetable sticks, so cucumber. If you peel the cucumber skin off, because otherwise it can be a bit stringy and they might sort of have a bit of a coughing fit on that. Cut the cucumber into lumps. You could try little cheese squares, toast bites. Anything like that is fantastic, and just have an experiment. And it takes a while for them to get used to flavours, so be prepared that you might spend ages preparing something and they only eat one bite and throw the rest back at you. But that finger food stage is again really important, because the purees and the lumps have been really good for developing all their oral skills. And yes, the finger foods will do that, but the finger foods will also help with hand-to-mouth coordination, and it also helps with that social environment. If they've got older siblings at all, sit them with them and get them interacting as well. It will all help to form a really good mealtime routine and a mealtime pattern. So that's the process of weaning: thin purees, thicker purees, lumps and finger foods. So what food should we be avoiding? We really want, when you're weaning, to have the fruit and vegetables, have lean proteins like your meats as well, have carbohydrates, pastas, potatoes, sweet potatoes. The one thing we really want to sort of monitor is the amount of salt that our babies are having. Under the age of 1, babies can only cope with a maximum of 1 gram of salt a day. That's all their bodies and their kidneys can process. And 1 gram of salt a day is a very small amount. So it's worth just bearing in mind that 1 gram, particularly if you're using a combination of maybe home foods, jar foods or shop-bought foods. Just try and monitor it. And if you're seeing that they're maybe getting increasingly thirsty or something, that may indicate that they're having a bit too much salt. As with children, we want to restrict sugar really, particularly at that age, because we don't want them to get overly used to the sugar taste. So trying to keep sugary foods down to a minimum, and honey would come under that bracket. And actually honey is something we try to advise you avoid in children under the age of 2. And that's because honey's got a certain bacteria that doesn't agree with the younger children. So keep an eye on the sugar in honey. Parents often ask me as well about nuts. And nuts over the age of 6 months are fine as long as they're grounded properly and in an appropriate texture. Otherwise, you can imagine whole nuts would create quite a choking risk. So that's salt, sugar and honey, and nuts, just to bear in mind. Once we're sort of established on weaning, the Department of Health and the government recommend that all babies over 6 months have a multivitamin. And the reason for that is they need the vitamin A, vitamin C and vitamin D, and they're not usually getting those 3 in the weaning foods. Good multivitamins for them to be on over 6 months are either Healthy Start vitamins or Abidec, and they're well recognised multivitamins available from your sort of health visitor or your GP, so please bear in mind that as well. So weaning, enjoy it, make the most of it, take lots of pictures, involve the family where you can, look after yourself as well, and bulk make things and then you can put it in the freezer for another day so you're not cooking endlessly every day. And it really isn't the end of the world if you have to rely on pots and jars and things as well. Just try and do it in combination. We often find babies who have lots of jars and pots and pouches tend to just stick with those foods, and it can be a bit more of a problem later on in life when they're going off to nursery and school. They may be a bit more of a fussy eater, so just bear that in mind too. But enjoy it and make the most of it. It goes really quickly.